Thank you very much, Shengen. We're now going to move into two sets of remarks. First, I'd like to call on Dr. Srinath Reddy. Dr. Reddy is the President of the Public Health Foundation of India. He has been formerly the head of the Department of Cardiology at AIIMS, that's the All India Institute for Medical Science. He is also currently adjunct professor at Rollins School of Public Health in Emory University and the Honorary Professor of Medicine at the University of Sydney, Australia. Thank you, Dr. Reddy.
Good morning. The two co-chairs, Dr. Menon and Dr. Phan, have already spoken about why we need multisectoral action to overcome the challenges of malnutrition in its many phases, especially the curse of undernutrition. To some extent, what needs to be done has also been elaborated. How it can be done is the subject matter of the rest of the conference. So I don't have much to speak about. However, there are a few challenges that we do need to recognize and address. And that is where I believe the concept of multisectoral action needs to be dissected and discussed so that we can actually accomplish our objectives. Nutrition is what everyone needs, but nobody owns. Clearly, we have seen the problems of lack of ownership, both at the level of the political leadership as well as in terms of implementing agencies afflicting the problem of nutrition. Because very divided ownership in a very fragmented manner has its own consequences. We have recognized how disease-specific or nutrition-specific programs have fragmented the delivery systems. We have also seen how we have segmented our approach into different age groups, talking through one program about children, one program about women, forgetting the adolescent girl in between, and not making the link between an underfed girl child, an anemic adolescent propelled into early pregnancy and improvident spacing of births, and ultimately having intergenerational effects on nutrition and health. So it is these disconnects that have been one of the major problems of our planning and implementation, and therefore the need to now bring about a much more integrated approach is absolutely clear. So we have been hearing as to why we need a life course approach, both in terms of linking up from preconception to pregnancy to early childhood to adolescence and to the next cycle of birth. But we also must recognize that in our anxiety to address some aspects of malnutrition, we've forgotten that malnutrition has many faces and many manifestations. Highly cereal-based supplementation of nutritional feeding practices in early childhood have resulted not in growth of the muscle mass, but of abdominal fat, making these children much more susceptible to early diabetes and cardiovascular diseases much later on. And of course, not even physically fit, even in their childhood and adolescence. So the whole idea of a more holistic, integrated approach to nutrition has to be abundantly clear, and that is where multisectorality becomes absolutely important. So how do we actually ensure that we have multidisciplinary learnings which can be translated into multisectoral applications? Obviously, when we are talking in terms of nutrition, of course, as I said, we must now move, and we have to some extent done so, from obsession with mere energy or calories to nutrition in its diversity. And that is where we must set the goal for the world as well as for the nation, that every citizen is entitled to calorically adequate but also nutritionally appropriate diets at every stage of his or her life throughout the life course. And that is where we must set our nutrition policy and our multisectoral goals. So we have to talk about adequate production, we have to talk about appropriate processing, availability across geographies within the country, affordability across social groups, acceptability across diverse cultural patterns. And that is where we have to position our nutritional implementation. And therefore, when we look at all of these, as has already been talked about in the context of both nutrition-sensitive and nutrition-specific interventions, we need to position the integration of nutrition as a key objective in policies related to a wide range of sectors and programs: water and sanitation and hygiene, the WASH, rural development and community-based initiatives, sustainable agriculture, food processing, fisheries, aquaculture, food security, public health, reproductive health, social protection, whether it is public distribution system, Food Security Act, or conditional cash transfers, education, Panchayat Raj institutions, and community ownership initiatives. All of these are going to be absolutely critical. We also have to ensure that there is emphasis on gender equality, empowerment of women in all sectors. Women's economic, social, reproductive, and domestic roles are essential for food and nutrition security. All of this will have to be woven together into a policy and programmatic matrix. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there are multiple challenges that we are beset with and adapt. Urbanization to climate change, population growth to growing economic inequities. All of these will have to be factored in when we look at what our approach to nutrition is going to be. Even, for example, when we look at agricultural production, just as a case in point, the Indian Agriculture Research Institute, where we are convening, says that nearly 60% of agricultural land in India is at risk because of fertilizer misuse, poor cropping practices, and soil nutrient deficiencies. And this latest report from the Global Harvest Gap Report, which actually focuses on India, says that there are a number of good things happening, but if you take the total factor productivity into account, at the current rate of TFP growth, domestic production will only meet 59% of India's food demand by 2030. So where are we going to produce more while conserving the natural resources, while not having pesticide misuse, not being climate resilient? These are going to be some of the challenges that even the agriculture sector will have to address. But there are requirements that go beyond the agriculture sector. We recognize now that mere agriculture and crop diversity does not ensure adequate nutrition. It does not translate automatically into dietary diversity, because particularly if you focus only on cereals and forget about other protein sources and so on fruit and vegetables, as has already been mentioned. But even from agricultural production or crop diversity to dietary diversity, there are intermediate factors. The whole area of processing, preferences, which are mediated either by culture or marketing, all of these need to be addressed, and this does require multidisciplinarity. And that's why the Public Health Foundation of India does not look health only through the health lens or particularly through a biomedical lens. We believe that health and nutrition require multidisciplinary learning. That's why we have people from anthropologists to behavioral change sociologists to from economists to epidemiologists and engineers under the same roof, working together in a concerted fashion for solutions. So again, we need from the policy to the community connect to be established. We also in application and implementation, and therefore implementation science also becomes an important area for knowledge generation. So how do we actually ensure convergence? We have spoken about multidisciplinary convergence and collaboration as an ideal, and this has remained an aspirational objective for a number of years, politely acknowledged in political rhetoric, but seldom implemented operationally. So how is this conference going to address that much better? And how are we going to actually move forward in terms of realization of that objective? Clearly, we have seen some successes where political will and administrative skill have combined to deliver successes in Maharashtra and Odisha. We ought to be able to learn from them. What is it that they did different from others, and what can we learn from them? But most importantly, we have to recognize that convergence comes from shared ownership and joint accountability. We cannot expect the ASHA and the Anganwadi worker to collaborate effectively at the community level if they have very different reporting systems with very different levels of accountability, unless there are methods for not only shared ownership at the ground level, but also joint accountability for nutrition outcomes at that community level. The same thing applies to the administrative departments, the line departments. There's no realistic, any expectation that line departments will automatically coalesce together is unrealistic, because they're going to be looking at their turf and their own individual priorities and protecting their own individual budget lines. So unless you actually ensure that there is shared ownership in planning, but even more importantly, joint accountability for delivery, define the metrics, and hold the team of multiple agencies, multiple sectors, multiple joint secretaries, if you will, accountable for the delivery of those metrics, of those outcomes based on those metrics. So we need to ensure that there are clear and cogent mechanisms for coordination and accountability. And of course, multi-sectorality and multidisciplinarity is a mindset, and therefore the culture of collaboration has to be fostered. That cannot be done only by making appeals on the basis of knowledge that we generate, but also ensuring that the political process becomes facilitatory for that kind of a coordination. And it's a pleasure to see the Secretary Coordination here, who I'm sure will ensure that at least in the life of this government, we'll see more coordination than has been seen in the past. Thank you.